Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. I have been told by an email I got that this is going to be the 500th episode of this particular YouTube channel. 500 sounds like a lot, doesn't it? You'd think I'd be much better at it than I am after all of that time, but it is what it is, and let's get started with Science Fiction Saturday and a couple of 1950s Universal Jack Arnold directed science fiction films that we all know and love. But I thought I'd just throw in a few observations about them. The first one, of course, is from 1955, and it is Tarantula, starring John Agar, Mara Corday, and in a very small role, Clint Eastwood. Then the other one I've got for you is the one that I prefer, which is It Came From Outer Space, again directed by Jack Arnold, made in 1953, made in 3D originally, and starring Richard Carlson, Barbara Rush, and Joe Sawyer, and Russell Johnson from Gilligan's Island, with an original screen treatment by Ray Bradbury. So let's get started with Tarantula. And yes, before anybody says it, I know Leo Jude Carroll was name-checked in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, so let's move past that and talk about the movie itself. On the channel, I have said that John Agar is not a good actor, and he isn't good in this one either, and I think it shows some of the weaknesses of this kind of format of a science fiction movie. I love it in a lot of ways. I'm not going to go there and diss the movie, but with this kind of 1950s science fiction film, the first thing you've got to do, apart from giving a slight foreshadowing of the evil stuff that's going to go on later, is set up why you should care about the characters. And this movie does that by getting the local doctor in a desert town, played by John Agar, to meet a scientific assistant who is going to help a scientist called Dr. Deemer in his scientific experiments, where he's trying to find a way to be able to feed the future population of the world, which is going to be increasing at a horrible rate. And in fact it did, but they found other ways of dealing with that. Mara Corday's character Stevie, or Stephanie as she's called, is a graduate biologist, and she's gone to assist these three scientists who are out in the desert basically messing around with radiation and hormones. What could possibly go wrong? At the start of the movie, though, we get a pre-title sequence where a hideously disfigured man staggers through the desert and drops dead, with buzzards circling around him, all of the usual cliches. And then it comes up with the titles, and we get into the meet cute between the biologist and the local doctor. Now, the orchestral score we get in this one's pretty good, by Joseph Gerstensen, and it's very full on for this kind of movie. There's lots of brass in it, really strident notes. It really makes it feel important with the music going in it. And then we see Dr. Deemer, played by Leo Jude Carroll, doing his experiments with lab animals, because people didn't care that much about lab animals in the 1950s. So he's injecting rats and hamsters and other creatures with his special sauce. And there's some really nice pans where we see a giant rat the size of a dog in one of the cages, and we see a hamster the size of a wombat in another one of them. There's a really nice reveal as Dr. Deemer moves across the lab of the fact that he's got a spider the size of a cat. One of the problems is that his other two lab assistants have decided they're going to inject themselves with a formula for no good reason apart from the fact that they're lonely in the desert, I suppose. And they then get acromegalia, thickening of the bones, which ultimately leads to death, but they get it at an accelerated rate. So basically you go from looking normal and 4 days later you look like Ron Hatton's ugly brother. And so you get that stigmatization of deformity and of disability that's been a part of horror movies in particular since the year dot. So these scientists are out there trying to look for non-organic food substitutes because they're always tastier. And the other lab assistant, who is undergoing that transformation after having the injection, is also deformed and goes a bit deranged and starts beating up on Dr. Deemer and smashing up the lab and setting it on fire, and as a side effect of that, releasing quite large tarantulas into the desert. So John Agar's doctor gets involved because they find the guy who died in the desert, and things don't look right. He's got acromegalia when he didn't have it a couple of weeks before. And so they gave him to visit the doctor. The doctor's lab's a bit wrecked up. He says that his assistant went mad and ran off into the desert, where what actually happened is his assistant died and he buried him in the desert. So the sympathetic scientist who makes a mistake isn't quite as sympathetic as you kind of wish he was, because he went and buried a guy in a desert and didn't tell anyone. Now, I don't know about other scientists, but that does seem to be a breach of ethics. And we see the spider growing and growing. We see it following a car in the desert, and it's about the size of a car. And then we get Steve and the doctor out in the desert looking at rock formation and stopping for a smoko, and they're smoking the cigarettes, and suddenly something yeets a whole bunch of rocks down on them from above. They don't see what it is, but we know it's a giant spider. And the interesting thing is, if you watch that sequence really slowly, you can see the shadow of a guy's hand chucking a rock at them from above. I always like those kind of mistakes in these movies because they're always a lot of fun to find. So they also find other things. Some horses get killed, some farmers get killed, some sheep get killed, and the carcasses are everywhere with only the skeletons left. And the doctor finds large pools of spider venom lying around the sites where these massacres have occurred. So he takes it to an analytical chemist in another city, played by Raymond Bailey, who played the banker in Beverly Hillbillies. But this is Raymond Bailey without his wig on, so he looks more natural. And he gives a really grounded, nice little performance there, where he's talking about the impossibility of there being this much spider venom in one place. I like that kind of acting, particularly in genre films, where an actor comes in, they're obviously a character actor working for a studio, and they really bring an A game. They bring a real grounded believability to their characters, even if they've only got one scene in the movie. That stuff is wonderful to me. I just love it every time I see it happen. And Raymond Bailey does that in this movie. Eventually, everyone finds out that the spider's enormous. It wrecks the lab and kills Dr. Dima, who has himself been injected with the formula by his mad assistant, and is going really manky with the acromegaly, only on one side of his face for some reason. It makes him look a little bit like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. The whole building gets smashed up. Steve escapes with John Agar, and they head towards town while a spider the size of an office building starts heading towards town. Now, the sheriff and the townspeople start trying to do something about this. They put a lot of dynamite across the road and try to blow it up, but that doesn't work. And then, of course, they call in the Air Force, and that's when we get Clint Eastwood in his jet. They try to fire rockets at it, and that doesn't work. And then they decide to drop napalm on it, and that works. And there's some great composite shots of the town, looking down the main street of the town, with the hills in the background, which are map paintings. And in between that, you've got a giant spider, which eventually gets set on fire by napalm. Tremendously well done for its time. And there are some really good composite matte shots in this, even though in some of the scenes you can see a transparency to the legs of the spider as it climbs down hills and things like that. But for 1955, you've got to forgive a little bit of that. They didn't have the technology to do things like that and to compose spiders into a shot with lifelike plausibility. It's a very straight through plot line, this one. Something goes wrong, there's a scientific problem, you get giant beasties, the boyfriend and girlfriend run away from them, start trying to figure out what's going on, the beastie attacks the town and they kill it. It's a very straight through plot line in this one. There's not terrible amounts of questioning the advisability of doing radioactive shit in the desert with animals. But having said that, I like it. Those desert town science fiction movies of the 1950s are iconic. It's great. You don't have to have enormous crowd scenes for them. You've got beautifully shot locations, and it's easy to light them because the sun does it for you, so you don't have to worry about putting up a lot of lamps. It's cheap to make because nobody owns that part of the desert, I suppose, and it gives you an isolated community trying to deal with a problem beyond their previous experience. It happens in the second film we're going to talk about as well. At first you get disbelief from the authorities, and they don't believe what the scientists are telling them, or in this case the doctor and the biologists are telling them, until they see it for themselves, and then they go, oh geez, we've got to do something about this. It's a lot easier now. You just take a photo with your phone and go, hey, take a look at this shit, and they believe you. But lack of credibility and that prosaic mindset where something's unusual, it's got to be something we can explain very easily. But no, it's not. It's something unprecedented. It's a spider the size of an iceberg, and you've got to deal with that differently than you would a couple of drunks in a drunk tank, and the cops are in no way prepared for that. Napalm's a good solution for this. I actually made napalm once with my mate when I was living in Sydney, and you can make napalm with a couple of bars of soap and a tank of petrol. It's crazily easy to make, and you end up with this stuff that's almost like silly putty but stinks, and it sticks to whatever it touches when it burns. It's horrible stuff, but it's so crazy easy to make. You can make it with petrol and styrofoam, though I don't recommend anybody does that because it is stinky and toxic chemicals come off it, and it's very hard to put out, and I don't recommend anybody does that. I misspent my youth doing that. Don't you do that in your old age. Just to finalise on Tarantula, if you have a look at the framing on the shots in a Jack Arnold movie, they're framed really well. There are some really interesting camera angles. You get some point of view shots between the fangs of the giant spider, and that's always fun. Getting those POV shots is terrific, where terrified farmers crawl across the ground trying to get away from it, All of that shit really is the bee's knees for me. And a lot of horror movies didn't do that kind of stuff. They didn't go that extra step of the point of view shot. They kind of had the monster coming off from the side or coming down from above or up from beneath. But that point of view really works in making it seem a little more realistic than it would otherwise. Because, yeah, special effects aren't perfect, but the point of view shots add that verisimilitude to make it feel real. These movies are comfort movies for us all. And it's good to rewatch them every now and then and just go, yeah, that's wonderful. And some people will say that that needs to be remade. You need to make a remake of Tarantula or any other film. Don't know that you do. I want to see new stuff. I don't want to keep seeing retreads of old stories. It's easy for studios to do that. It's cheap for studios to do that. It's lazy for studios to do that. I think we're going to let movies like the Universal films from the 1950s just sit where they are. And we can take comfort in the fact that they're good, solid entertainments of their time. They have some interesting character actors in them, John Agar being the exception, of course. And then they're comfort films. They're the ones you sit down over Halloween or over Christmas, stick the disc in the machine, and just have a good time with your popcorn and beer. Now let's move on to the more interesting film for me. It came from outer space from 1953, which is based on a screen treatment by Ray Bradbury called The Meteor. And it starts out with your classic Universal science fiction horror film of the 1950s thing. Your creepy theremin music, and then it cuts straight into a spaceship crashing into the desert. Bam, just like that, titles come up, all in 3D, because it was made in 3D. But I was thinking about 3D. The new 3D they had in cinemas 10 years ago seems to have dropped off because it didn't add much to the story. It doesn't bring too much more to a narrative than was already there. In fact, it brings bugger all more. And yes, it was a gimmick in the 1950s to combat the damage that television was doing to box office revenues for cinemas. But looking at it in retrospect, it's fun in movies like House of Wax, which are not on a large scale. But for most movies that were made in 3D, you don't need it. It's cute, but it's unnecessary. It doesn't bring much to the table. Having said that, I kind of like the relationship between the people in this one. Richard Carlson and Barbara Rush around in the desert. They're obviously engaged. He's showing her his big telescope. They're looking at the night sky, and she's talking about astrology. He's talking about astronomy. They kind of have some jokes about each other. There's a nice rapport and a nice chemistry between the actors. And from what I understand, most of the dialogue was taken directly from the treatment that Ray Bradbury did. So the dialogue has got a little bit more zest to it than dialogue had in a lot of these movies, and the characters are engaging for that reason. Yeah, we know they're in love, we know they're having fun. He's a writer, she is a school teacher, heading towards marriage probably, and suddenly the meteor comes down, smashes into the desert. They get their mate who's got a helicopter to drive them over there. They land on the edge of the crater. Richard Carlson and Barbara Rush go down into the crater. Richard Carlson goes further, and he sees a giant geodesic sphere embedded into the side of the crater. It's obviously nothing natural, and he starts scrambling back up, and a rockfall buries the spaceship, and he's the only one who saw it. So he tries to tell the authorities, and nobody believes him because nobody believes the heroes in these kind of movies until everything goes tits up. Then we find out that some of the aliens were left outside the spaceship before the rockfall buried it. And they've got to find a way to excavate to get to their spaceship, do some repairs on it, and get back where they came from. So ultimately they're shipwrecked, and they're not here to invade us. They're not here to sleep with our women. They're not here to shoot our dogs with laser beams. They're basically here because they crashed. They're the equivalent of somebody who gets a flat tire on the side of the road and the spare's flat as well. So what we find out is the aliens are shapeshifters, and they start kidnapping people and shapeshifting into their forms so that they can go into town and get excavation equipment and get things they need and get some copper wire and all the other stuff that they need to repair their ship. So basically what they're doing is MacGyvering a repair so they can get the hell off Earth. That's not how the humans see it. There's a couple of telegraph linesmen played by Joe Sawyer, who I remember was in Rin Tin Tin, the old TV series, and Russell Johnson from Gilligan's Island. And they get some cute dialogue as well. Bradbury's dialogue sparkles compared to most of the dialogue in these kind of films. They've got a nice rapport, they're working buddies. They get captured by the aliens duplicate their physical appearance and steal their clothes because they obviously don't want to walk around naked, and go into town and don't act the way they're supposed to. Their wives are worried about them, their boss is worried about them, all that kind of thing. And more people start getting grabbed by the aliens. Meanwhile, everybody's making fun of Richard Carlson's character because they don't believe he saw a flying saucer. He gets mocked on the radio, he gets mocked by the newspapers, he gets mocked by the coppers, and the sheriff, played by Charles Drake, is a nutcase. He is the last person you want to have on the backside of a gun. He's nasty. It's pretty obvious that he has the hots for Barbara Rush's character, the school teacher. He says he's trying to protect her from this strange guy who writes things. He lives out in the desert by himself. But it's pretty obvious he has a different agenda. Richard Carlson's character sees the two linesmen who are missing in town buying stuff from a hardware store and walking into an alley. And he confronts them in a doorway and says, "What's going on, guys?" And they tell him, "Leave us alone, go away, forget you saw us." And he's got a gun, but he chooses not to use it. This movie doesn't play out as the usual gung-ho, gun-happy kind of thing where you see an alien and instantly you want to perforate it with very fast pieces of metal. Things don't get to a head till Ellen, the girlfriend played by Barbara Rush, is kidnapped as well. They need as many people as they can to excavate the ship and repair it so they can get off Earth. And there's a great scene where John, the character played by Richard Carlson, sees the aliens as they really are. They've got one enormous eye, kind of hairy and tentacled. They've got kind of smoke dripping off them. They're utterly alien. And there are some good POV shots where the way they made them was they found some very durable stuff to make bubbles out of, and they'd put a bubble over the camera lens. And you can see what they've done is the bubbles are superimposed on the images, and they've managed to keep these bubbles going in front of the camera lenses long enough to get a couple of seconds of footage. And what they then do is they have the bubble wobble, and then they reverse the shot and make it go forward again. So it's basically repeated 2 seconds of the bubble, 2 seconds of the reverse shot, 2 seconds more of it. So they extended the life of these very ephemeral bubbles they put over the camera lens, and then they superimpose that over the actual shot. It's quite a nice way of doing it. And it gives us that point of view of the alien where you go, yeah, that's not how human eyes work. What do these things look like? And the aliens, which you don't see very much of, but you see enough to understand why John, the Richard Carlson character, is terrified by seeing them. And it's the reason that the aliens didn't go to town to get help in their own forms. Their appearance is so hideous from a human point of view that it instinctively instills fear in. And John tells this to the sheriff when there's a tarantula, oddly enough, walking across the desert floor. John tells the sheriff that humans have an instinctive fear of things that look a certain way, and that their instincts are to destroy it because that is the way they perceive it. So again, you've got that Ray Bradbury complexity about human interactions with the unknown, and it works. This film is much better written than Tarantula is. Nonetheless, the sheriff decides he's going to go out there and shoot all the aliens because that's his role in the movie. He has really poor impulse control. He is a shocker from a modern point of view. And the sheriff gets a posse who confront one of the aliens who's driving a pickup truck back to the site and bringing some gear. And they just stand in front of the truck stops, and they shoot it. It's in human form. They aren't entirely sure that it's not the guy. So there's no due process. It's just stand in a row in front of the truck and shoot this guy. It really made me cringe when I saw that scene this time around. Disobeying the rule of law for a start. Just shooting things because you think they might be aliens. Then John tries to get Ellen back by going into the mine and into where the spaceship is. Then he sees the alien in Ellen's form and threatens to shoot it. And the alien points a rod and starts ripping a death ray back and forth across the cave wall behind him. And those special effects work really well. John ends up shooting the alien because the alien thinks that he's got the posse to come and get him. And there are mistakes made on both sides here. The aliens are no more infallible or no more intelligent really than human beings. And they jump to assumptions when things get rough. And that, in spite of their appearance, kind of humanizes them. So John, the Richard Carlson character, buries the entrance to the mine so that the posse can't get to them. And then everybody sees the aliens fly back into the sky. They've repaired the ship. The end. This is a crazily satisfying science fiction movie. It doesn't just go with the old trope of the aliens are just here to destroy the world or take over the world or sleep with all of our women or any of those other tropes. It's like these people have crashed and they're lost, and they're trying to get things done in a way that has a minimal impact on both themselves and the civilization nearby. It really allows you to think deeply about it and go, yeah, this movie for 1953 has a complex and nuanced view of these aliens. And I love that. It's not something that particularly happened at that time. The xenophobia of the era is not reflected in this movie in the protagonist. It is in the secondary characters like the sheriff, but the thrust of the narrative is not xenophobic at all. And at the end of the movie, they do make the point. It's a bit too soon for these aliens to contact human beings. We're not ready for them, and we're not ready to meet them in amicable terms. And that makes It Came From Outer Space a lot more interesting than much more well-regarded science fiction movies at the time. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks a lot for supporting the channel through 500 videos. If you haven't, you've still got some to watch. I still love it. I'm still passionate about doing these videos and keeping the channel going. I still find new movies to talk about all the time, which is the amazing bit. Eventually, in about 30, 40 years, I may run out of them. We'll see how it goes. But for now, it's a joy to talk about movies, to interact with the people in the comments, to just point people in the direction of cool stuff, and to talk about it in a way that's not just, I like this was really good. I never thought I'd be doing this long term. I never thought I'd be doing this at all, but I should have done it a lot sooner than I did. So thanks for watching the videos. I appreciate it a lot. I appreciate the love and support that the channel has received. You can like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can become a channel member. You can also support the channel on patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Got some more stuff. The next video I've got's kind of interesting, kind of different. It's a movie haul, but I actually filmed it outside. But anyway, I've got to get this one finished because I've got the nephew turning up tomorrow. He's going to be here for 5 days. So we're going to have a 13-year-old in the house for 5 days doing stuff with us. So until after Billy goes away, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some movies that really are better than I thought they were the previous 7 times I watched them. And I'll catch you next time.